Saturday night, 7:47 p.m. Manhattan Grand Hotel. Victoria Sterling's manicured fingers grip the $5 million check. Her diamond rings catch the chandelier light as she tears it in half. Then quarters. Then confetti. "Security!" Her voice cuts through the ballroom. "Get this janitor out of my gala before he embarrasses himself further." The paper pieces flutter down onto Marcus Thompson's worn shoes. He doesn't move, doesn't flinch, just watches the destruction of his donation with an expression that unsettles everyone who notices it. He's smiling, because Victoria Sterling just destroyed a check from the man who owns 34% of her company. And she has no idea. Comment your city below, let's see how far this story travels. The charity gala had been running for exactly 2 hours and 43 minutes when Marcus Thompson walked through the grand entrance of the Manhattan Grand Hotel. He paused just inside the doorway, adjusting the collar of his dark suit. The fabric wasn't expensive. The cut wasn't fashionable. He'd bought it at Goodwill 3 years ago for his wife's funeral, and it still fit well enough. "Sir." The security guard stepped forward, hand raised. "Can I see your invitation?" Marcus reached into his jacket pocket and produced the cream-colored envelope. Gold lettering. Sterling Pharmaceuticals. Annual Charity Gala. His name printed clearly at the top. The guard studied it for a long moment, then studied Marcus, then the invitation again. "Wait here, please." Marcus waited. He was good at waiting. 30 years of mopping floors had taught him patience. So had raising a daughter alone. So had watching his wife die slowly in a hospital bed, while doctors explained that the treatment existed, but the funding didn't. The guard returned with a woman in a headset. She took the invitation, examined it, held it up to the light like checking for counterfeit bills. "Mr. Thompson." "That's right. And you're a guest?" "I'm a donor." They exchanged glances. The kind Marcus had seen 1,000 times. The kind that said, "This man doesn't belong here. Look at his clothes. Look at his shoes. Look at his skin." "Follow me, please." She led him through a side entrance rather than the main doors where photographers waited. Marcus noticed. He didn't comment. He'd learned long ago that some battles weren't worth fighting. The ballroom was everything he'd expected. Crystal chandeliers, ice sculptures, women in gowns that cost more than his annual salary, men in tuxedos discussing stock portfolios and golf handicaps, and everywhere the Sterling Pharmaceuticals logo. The company that had developed the treatment his daughter needed. The company he'd invested $847 million in over 5 years. The company that had no idea he existed. "There's a seating area near the service entrance," the woman said, gesturing vaguely toward a corner. "Perhaps you'd be more comfortable." "I'd like to find my table, please. I'm seated at table 7. Table 7 is the donor recognition section. That's for our platinum-level contributors. "I know." She stared at him. "Sir, platinum donors have contributed at least $5 million to tonight's cause." Marcus reached into his jacket and produced a second envelope. This one thicker. He handed it to her. "This is my contribution for tonight. I'd like to present it to Ms. Sterling personally if possible. It's for the Children's Oncology Wing." The woman opened the envelope. Her eyes widened slightly at the check inside, then narrowed with suspicion. "Wait here, Mr. Thompson. I'll need to verify this." She walked away quickly, heels clicking against the marble floor. Marcus stood alone near a pillar, watching the crowd swirl around him like water around a stone. No one acknowledged him. No one offered him champagne. A waiter carrying a tray of hors d'oeuvres walked past without stopping. 7 minutes later she returned, this time with backup. "Mr. Thompson, there seems to be an issue with your contribution." "What kind of issue?" "This check is for $5 million. "That's correct." "From someone named Marcus Thompson." "That's me." "Sir?" She lowered her voice, though not enough to prevent nearby guests from hearing. "This check is drawn on Thompson Family Trust. We have no record of any Thompson Family Trust in our donor database." That's because I've never donated under that name before. My previous contributions were anonymous. Previous contributions? Yes. The pediatric research wing, the oncology equipment, the clinical trial funding. I've been contributing to Sterling Pharmaceuticals' charitable arm for 5 years. The woman's expression shifted from suspicious to pitying, the kind of pity reserved for delusional people, for liars who'd been caught. Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. I haven't done anything wrong. You're attempting to pass a fraudulent check at a high-profile charity event. That's fraud. That's criminal. The check is real. Call the bank if you'd like. It's Saturday night. Banks are closed. Call the emergency verification line. The number's on the back of the check. She didn't even glance at it. Security will escort you out. 2 guards appeared at Marcus's elbows. Large men, professional. Their hands weren't on him yet, but they would be soon. Ma'am, I'm asking you to verify the check before making assumptions. And I'm asking you to leave before we have to call the police. Is there a problem here? The voice cut through the tension like a blade. Clear, commanding, accustomed to obedience. Victoria Sterling approached with the confidence of a woman who owned every room she entered. Her gown was emerald green, custom designed, worth more than Marcus's house. Her jewelry sparkled. Her smile didn't. Victoria. The woman with the headset looked relieved. This gentleman was attempting to pass a fraudulent check. We were just escorting him out. Victoria's eyes traveled over Marcus slowly, taking in the Goodwill suit, the scuffed shoes, the gray in his hair, the calluses on his hands. A fraudulent check. $5 million. Obviously fake. Obviously. Victoria extended her hand. Let me see it. The woman handed over the check. Victoria examined it with theatrical scrutiny, turning it over, holding it up to the light. Her diamond rings caught the chandelier glow. Thompson Family Trust, she read aloud. Loud enough for nearby guests to hear. Loud enough for heads to turn. I don't recognize that name. My contributions have been anonymous, Marcus said quietly. I preferred it that way. Anonymous? Victoria's lips curved into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. How convenient. Ms. Sterling, if you just verify. Let me tell you what I see, Mr. Thompson. She stepped closer, still holding his check. I see a man who doesn't belong here. I see clothes from a thrift store. I see shoes that haven't been polished in years. I see someone who probably works in a building like this, but on the other side of the service entrance. Marcus said nothing. And I see a check for $5 million with a name no one has ever heard of, written by a man who looks like he couldn't afford the parking fee to get into this building. Appearances can be deceiving. Can they? Victoria laughed. It was a cold sound. Let me tell you something about appearances, Mr. Thompson. In my world, appearances are everything. They tell us who belongs and who doesn't, who matters and who's invisible. And you're invisible. She raised the check higher. The guests around them had stopped pretending not to watch. This, Victoria announced, her voice carrying across the ballroom, is exactly why we need better security at these events. Some people simply don't know their place. Ms. Sterling, look at him. She gestured at Marcus like he was an exhibit. Look at his clothes, his shoes. Does this look like a man who has $5 million? Does this look like someone who belongs at a platinum donor table? Scattered laughter rippled through the crowd. Cell phones appeared. Someone started filming. The check is real. Marcus said, his voice steady. If you'll just take a moment to verify. Verify what? That you stole a checkbook. That you found someone's financial information and decided to play pretend for an evening. I didn't steal anything. Then where did you get this? She waved the check. Where does a janitor get $5 million? Marcus's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. How do you know I'm a janitor? Victoria's smile widened. Am I wrong? He didn't answer. He couldn't because she wasn't wrong. He was a janitor. He mopped floors at Lincoln Elementary School 5 days a week. He'd done it for 12 years. But that wasn't the whole story. That was never the whole story. That's what I thought. Victoria turned to her audience, playing to the cameras now. This is a teaching moment, everyone. This is why we can never let our guard down. The moment we show weakness, they exploit it. They, Marcus asked quietly. People who don't belong. People who think they can fake their way into spaces that were never meant for them. People who think a stolen check and a cheap suit can fool us. She held up the check again, making sure every camera could see it. I am so tired of this. Tired of people thinking they can walk into our events, our spaces, our world, and demand to be treated as equals when they haven't earned a single thing. Everyone earns their place differently, Marcus said. Oh, really? Victoria laughed. And what have you earned, Mr. Thompson? What have you contributed to society except mopping floors and apparently stealing checkbooks? Marcus looked at her steadily. I raised a daughter alone after my wife died. I worked 2 jobs for 15 years to give her everything she needed. And when she got sick, I did whatever it took to make sure she had access to the treatment that could save her life. For a moment, something flickered across Victoria's face. Something almost like hesitation. Then it vanished. A touching story. I'm sure you've rehearsed it many times. But touching stories don't make fake checks real. The check is real. Enough. Victoria's patience snapped. I've wasted enough time on this performance. Security, escort this man out. And hold him until police arrive. I want him charged with attempted fraud. The guards moved forward. Their hands closed around Marcus's arms. Wait, Marcus said. Just wait. Let me prove the check is real. How? Call the bank. Call the verification line. It takes 2 minutes. Victoria hesitated. The cameras were still rolling. Her guests were still watching. If she was wrong, but she wasn't wrong. She couldn't be wrong. Look at him. Look at his clothes. Look at his hands. Look at his skin. People like that didn't have $5 million. It was simply impossible. Fine. Victoria's voice dripped with contempt. Let's humiliate you thoroughly. Sarah. A young woman in a black dress hurried forward. Victoria's assistant by the look of her. Call the number on this check. Let's all watch as this man's lies fall apart. Sarah took the check, pulling out her phone. Marcus watched her dial, his expression unreadable. Hello? Yes, I need to verify a check. Thompson Family Trust. The amount is $5 million. Yes, I'll hold. Silence stretched across the ballroom. Victoria stood with her arms crossed, triumphant smile already in place. The guards maintained their grip on Marcus. The cameras kept recording. What? Sarah's face went pale. Are you sure? Can you repeat that? Victoria's smile faltered slightly. What is it? I need to... Sarah looked at Marcus, then at Victoria, then back at her phone. Can you spell the account holder's name for me? She listened. Her face went from pale to white. Thank you. She ended the call. Her hand was shaking. Well, Victoria demanded, tell everyone how I caught a thief. Sarah looked at her employer with an expression Marcus had seen before. The expression of someone delivering very bad news. The check is real. The words hung in the air like smoke. What? The check is real, Victoria. Thompson Family Trust is a legitimate account. The balance is... She swallowed. The balance is sufficient to cover this check many times over. That's impossible. The bank confirmed it. The check is valid. The account is active. The signatory is Marcus Thompson. Victoria stared at the check in her hand like it had transformed into a snake. Then at Marcus. Then at the crowd of guests, still watching, still recording. There must be some mistake. There's no mistake. Marcus's voice was quiet, calm, almost gentle. I told you the check was real. But you're a janitor. I am. Janitors don't have $5 million. This one does. Victoria's mind raced. There had to be an explanation. Inheritance lottery, some kind of accident settlement? It didn't matter. What mattered was that she'd just publicly humiliated a man who was apparently legitimately wealthy. Well, she forced a smile, attempting to regain control. It seems I owe you an apology, Mr. Thompson. An honest mistake given the circumstances. The circumstances? Your appearance. You have to understand how this looked from my perspective. I understand exactly how it looked from your perspective. Then you understand why I was suspicious. Anyone would have been. Anyone who judges people by their clothes instead of their character. Victoria's smile became strained. Let's not make this into something it isn't. I was protecting my guests from what appeared to be fraud. That's simply due diligence. Is that what you call it? I'm apologizing, aren't I? Marcus looked at her for a long moment. The cameras were still recording. The guests were still watching. Sarah still held the check in trembling hands. No, Marcus said finally. You're not apologizing. You're making excuses. There's a difference. I said I was sorry. You said it seemed like you owed me an apology. That's not the same thing. Victoria's eyes flashed. She wasn't accustomed to being corrected, especially not in public. Especially not by someone who looked like Marcus Thompson. Fine. I'm sorry. There. Happy? Not particularly. What do you want from me? I admitted I was wrong. I apologized. What more do you expect? Marcus glanced at the check still visible in Sarah's hand, then at the guards still gripping his arms, then at the crowd of wealthy guests still watching him like an animal at the zoo. I expect you to ask yourself something, Ms. Sterling. What's that? You said you didn't recognize the Thompson Family Trust, that you'd never heard of me or my contributions. That's correct. But you also said this bank's charitable arm has received anonymous donations over the past 5 years. The pediatric research wing, the oncology equipment, the clinical trial funding. Victoria frowned. What's your point? My point is that I've donated over $800 million to your company's foundations, and you had no idea who I was. You didn't bother to find out. You just saw a black man in a cheap suit and decided I must be a criminal. The words landed like physical blows. Victoria's face reddened. I never mentioned your race. You didn't have to. That's a serious accusation. Is it? Let's review what you said. Some people don't know their place. People who don't belong. Our events, our spaces, our world. They exploit weakness. Marcus tilted his head slightly. Who do you think you were talking about, Ms. Sterling? Who do you think they referred to? The ballroom had gone completely silent. Even the waiters had stopped moving. I was talking about fraudsters, Victoria said stiffly. Criminals. People who try to cheat their way into society. And how did you identify me as one of those people? What evidence did you have? My clothes, my shoes. He paused. My skin. This is ridiculous. I'm not going to stand here and be lectured by who, Ms. Sterling? She stopped. Her mouth opened, then closed. Marcus waited. By anyone? She finished lamely. I'm not going to be lectured by anyone. I'm the CEO of a Fortune 500 company. I've built an empire. I've employed thousands of people. I've contributed billions to medical research. And you think you can walk in here and accuse me of judging someone by their appearance instead of their worth. I made a reasonable assumption based on available evidence. The only evidence was what I looked like, and you assumed that meant I was worthless, that I was criminal, that I didn't belong in the same room as you. Victoria's hands clenched at her sides. You're putting words in my mouth. Am I? Marcus looked around the ballroom at the watching faces. You asked what I'd earned. What I'd contributed. You assumed the answer was nothing. Because of how I look. Because of what I wear. Because of the color of my skin. That's not... Let me tell you what I've earned, Ms. Sterling. Marcus's voice was still quiet, but something had shifted in it. Something harder. I've earned every callus on my hands, every gray hair on my head, every sleepless night worrying about my daughter. I've earned the right to walk into any room wearing any clothes and be treated with basic human dignity. He stepped forward slightly. The guards had released him without seeming to realize it. And I've earned something else. Something that affects you directly. Victoria's eyes narrowed. What are you talking about? You said you didn't recognize the Thompson Family Trust, that you'd never heard of my contributions. Because they were anonymous. But you should have known anyway. You're the CEO. You should know who your major investors are. I know all our major investors. Do you? Marcus reached into his jacket pocket. Because I don't think you do. He pulled out a simple white business card. Plain, unassuming. Easy to overlook like the man holding it. He placed it on the nearest table. Victoria stared at it without picking it up. What's that supposed to prove? Pick it up. I'm not playing games. It's not a game. Pick up the card. Something in his tone made her reach for it. Her fingers trembled slightly as she lifted the card and read the text. The color drained from her face. That's impossible. You keep using that word. I don't think it means what you think it means. Victoria looked up at him with wide eyes, then down at the card again, then at the check still in Sarah's hand. You can't be... Thompson Family Trust, Marcus said quietly. 34% stakeholder in Sterling Pharmaceuticals, chairman of the investment board, the single largest individual donor to your company's charitable foundations. He let the words sink in. You just tried to have your biggest investor arrested for fraud, after publicly humiliating him, after calling him a thief, after implying he was a criminal because of how he looked. Victoria's mouth moved without producing sound. And you did it on camera. Marcus gestured at the phone still recording. In front of everyone, with multiple live streams broadcasting to thousands of viewers. The ballroom remained absolutely silent. Somewhere in the distance, a champagne cork popped absurdly out of place. Marcus looked at Victoria with an expression that was almost sad. You asked me what I've earned, Ms. Sterling, what I've contributed. Now let me ask you the same question. He leaned forward slightly. What have you earned tonight? What have you contributed? What exactly did your assumptions accomplish except to destroy everything you thought you'd built? Victoria's hand shook. The business card fluttered from her fingers, landing silently on the marble floor. Marcus watched it fall. I believe we have a great deal to discuss, Ms. Sterling, but not here, not like this. He checked his watch, the Patek Philippe his wife had inherited from her grandfather, worth more than Victoria's car. I'll see you at the emergency board meeting, tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. sharp. He turned and began walking toward the exit. Mr. Thompson? Victoria's voice cracked. Wait, please. Marcus paused but didn't turn around. Please, she repeated. Can we discuss this privately? Can we work something out? He stood motionless for a long moment. You want to discuss things privately now? His voice carried across the silent ballroom. After you humiliated me publicly, after you announced to everyone that I don't belong here, after you called security to drag me out like a criminal, I made a mistake. You made a choice. Choices have consequences. What consequences? What are you going to do? Marcus finally turned. His expression wasn't angry. It wasn't triumphant. It was something far worse. It was disappointed. I'm going to do what you should have done from the beginning, Ms. Sterling. I'm going to treat everyone in this situation with dignity and fairness. Even you. He paused. Especially you. He resumed walking toward the exit. Because that's the difference between us. You saw a man in cheap clothes and assumed he was worthless. I see a woman in expensive clothes, and I still see a human being capable of change. The doors swung open before him. "The question is whether you'll prove me right or wrong." And then he was gone. Victoria stood frozen in the center of the ballroom, surrounded by cameras and whispers, and the slowly dawning realization that her world had just shifted beneath her feet. Her phone buzzed. A text from her assistant. "The video is trending. #CEO's cleaner. 50,000 views and climbing." She closed her eyes. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. sharp. The reckoning was coming. The elevator doors closed behind Victoria Sterling, sealing her away from the whispers that had followed her across the ballroom. She leaned against the mirrored wall, pressing her palms flat against the cold surface to stop them from shaking. Her phone hadn't stopped buzzing since Marcus Thompson walked out. Texts from board members, calls from her PR team, notifications from social media platforms she'd never bothered to check personally. Sarah stood beside her, clutching a tablet, scrolling through the damage. "How bad?" Victoria asked without opening her eyes. "The video has 200,000 views. It's been 20 minutes." "Which video?" "All of them. There are at least 15 different angles. Someone already made a compilation." Sarah's voice wavered. "It's the number 3 trending topic on Twitter. Number 1 in New York." Victoria's stomach lurched. "What are they saying?" "You don't want to know." "Tell me." Sarah hesitated, then read from her screen. "CEO gets destroyed by janitor she tried to humiliate. Rich woman tears up check from her own investor. Karma is real and her name is Victoria Sterling." She paused. "Those are the polite ones." The elevator reached the penthouse floor. Victoria's private suite, reserved for nights when the gala ran late. She'd planned to celebrate here. Champagne with select donors. Congratulations on another successful event. Now it felt like a prison. "Get me everything on Marcus Thompson," Victoria said, striding into the suite. "Everything. His investment history, his background, his family. I want to know what we're dealing with." "I already started." Sarah pulled up files on her tablet. It's extensive." "Show me." Sarah handed over the tablet. Victoria sank onto the sofa, scrolling through documents that made her chest tighten with each passing page. Marcus Thompson, age 42, widower. 1 daughter, Emma, age 14. Currently employed as head janitor at Lincoln Elementary School. Annual salary $34,000. But that was just the surface. Wife Catherine Thompson, née Catherine Whitfield, deceased 3 years ago. Cause of death: Hartman's disease. Victoria's breath caught. Hartman's disease, the rare genetic condition that Sterling Pharmaceuticals had spent 7 years developing a treatment for. The treatment that had become their flagship humanitarian project. The treatment that had made Victoria a darling of the medical philanthropy world. She kept reading. Catherine Whitfield, only child of Robert and Eleanor Whitfield, sole heir to the Whitfield pharmaceutical fortune. "Oh God," Victoria whispered. "It gets worse," Sarah said quietly. The Whitfield family had been pioneers in pharmaceutical investment. Robert Whitfield had made his fortune backing biotech startups in the 1970s. When he died in 2015, his estate was valued at $3.2 billion. Everything went to Catherine. When Catherine died, everything went to Marcus, including a 34% stake in Sterling Pharmaceuticals, Victoria's own company. "He's been my biggest shareholder for 3 years," she said, her voice hollow. 3 years, and I didn't know. The investments were managed through the Thompson Family Trust. There was never a face attached to it, just lawyers and holding companies. But someone should have known. Someone should have told me. Would it have mattered? Victoria looked up sharply. "What's that supposed to mean?" Sarah flinched but didn't back down. "You saw him tonight before you knew any of this. You saw a black man in a cheap suit. You assumed he was a fraud. Would knowing he was rich have changed how you treated him? Of course it would have. That's the problem, Victoria. That's exactly the problem." Victoria opened her mouth to respond, then closed it. Because Sarah was right. She would have treated Marcus Thompson differently if she'd known he was wealthy. She would have smiled instead of sneered. She would have welcomed him instead of calling security. And that said something ugly about who she was. "What about his daughter?" Victoria asked, changing the subject. "You said she's 14. Sarah's expression darkened. "Emma Thompson. She was diagnosed with Hartman's disease 18 months ago." Victoria felt the blood drain from her face. She has what killed her mother. It's genetic. The mother was a carrier. The daughter developed symptoms young, early onset, more aggressive. Is she being treated? Is she on our protocol? She's been in Sterling Memorial Hospital for 6 weeks. Room 412, Pediatric Oncology Wing. Sarah paused. The wing that Marcus Thompson funded anonymously 3 years ago. Victoria set the tablet down. Her hands were shaking again. He funded the wing where his daughter is being treated. Yes. With money that my company... She couldn't finish the sentence. The check he tried to give you tonight was for the Children's Oncology expansion. He wanted to name it after his daughter, the Emma Thompson Pediatric Center. Sarah's voice cracked slightly. You tore it up on camera. Victoria pressed her hands against her face. The diamond rings that had sparkled so beautifully an hour ago now felt like weights dragging her down into a darkness of her own making. What have I done? Sarah didn't answer. There was nothing to say. Victoria's phone rang. She looked at the screen. Board member, Charles Whitmore, the oldest member of Sterling Pharmaceuticals Board of Directors. Charles, she answered, trying to keep her voice steady. Victoria. His tone was ice. I assume you've seen the videos. I've seen them. Then you understand why I'm calling. The board is concerned. The board should be concerned about context, Charles. This was a misunderstanding. A mistake in judgment. A mistake in judgment? Charles laughed bitterly. You publicly humiliated the man who owns more of this company than you do. You called him a criminal. You accused him of fraud. And you did it while cameras were rolling. I didn't know who he was. That's not an excuse, Victoria. That's an indictment. You didn't know who he was because you didn't bother to find out. You saw a black man in inexpensive clothes and you decided he was worthless. That tells us something about your judgment that no amount of spin can fix. Victoria's grip tightened on the phone. What are you saying, Charles? I'm saying there will be an emergency board meeting tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. Marcus Thompson called it himself. He has the authority. Charles paused. And I'm saying you should prepare for the possibility that this meeting will not go well for you. The board wouldn't remove me over one incident. One incident that's been viewed by 500,000 people and counting. One incident that makes the company look racist and elitist. One incident that involves our largest shareholder. Charles's voice hardened. Victoria, we have institutional investors threatening to divest. We have civil rights organizations preparing statements. We have congressional staffers asking questions about our diversity practices. In 1 hour. It's the internet age, Victoria. 1 hour is an eternity. By morning, this will be the only story anyone's talking about. Victoria closed her eyes. What do you suggest I do? Pray, apologize, and hope that Marcus Thompson is a more forgiving man than you deserve. He hung up. Victoria sat motionless, the dead phone still pressed against her ear. Outside the penthouse windows, Manhattan glittered with a million lights. She'd always loved this view. The city spread beneath her like a kingdom waiting to be conquered. Now it felt like a jury waiting to deliver its verdict. Sarah? Yes. Find out where Marcus Thompson is staying tonight. I need to talk to him before the board meeting. Victoria, I don't think... Just find him. Sarah nodded reluctantly and left the room. Victoria sat alone in the penthouse, surrounded by luxury she'd spent her entire life acquiring. The gown, the jewelry, the view, all the trappings of success that she'd been so proud of an hour ago. None of it meant anything now. Because Marcus Thompson had been right. She had judged him by his appearance. She had assumed that his clothes defined his worth. She had seen a janitor and decided he couldn't possibly belong in her world. And she'd been wrong. Catastrophically publicly, irredeemably wrong. But worse than being wrong was the question that kept echoing in her mind. Would she have treated him differently if he'd been white? The answer, she realized with sick certainty, was yes. She would have been suspicious. She would have questioned the check. But she wouldn't have torn it up. She wouldn't have called him a thief. She wouldn't have announced to the entire ballroom that he didn't know his place. Those words haunted her now. His place. As if some people were born with places and others had to earn them. As if worth was determined by skin color and wardrobe choices. Her phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. He's at Sterling Memorial Hospital, visiting his daughter, room 412. Victoria stared at the message. The man she'd humiliated was spending his night at the bedside of a dying child, while she sat in a penthouse feeling sorry for herself. She made a decision. Sarah, have the car brought around. I'm going to the hospital. 20 minutes later, Victoria Sterling walked through the doors of Sterling Memorial Hospital. The building bore her family name, a legacy of generations of philanthropic contributions. Tonight, that name felt like an accusation. She'd changed out of the gala gown into simpler clothes. Pants, a blouse, flat shoes. She'd removed most of the jewelry, keeping only her wedding ring from a marriage that had ended 5 years ago in mutual indifference. The pediatric ward was quiet at this hour. Soft lights, muted voices, the beeping of monitors, and the squeak of rubber-soled shoes on linoleum floors. Room 412 was at the end of the hall. The door was slightly ajar, warm light spilling into the corridor. Victoria paused outside, suddenly uncertain. What was she doing here? What could she possibly say that would undo what she'd done? Then she heard voices from inside. "Dad, you're not telling me what happened." A girl's voice, young but knowing. The voice of someone who'd learned too early that adults kept secrets. "Nothing happened, sweetheart. The gala was fine." Marcus's voice, tired but gentle. The voice of a father protecting his child from hard truths. "Then why are you here? You were supposed to stay for the dinner. You were supposed to meet the researchers." "I decided I'd rather be here with you." "Dad." The girl's voice sharpened. "I'm not stupid. Something happened. I can see it on your face." A pause. Victoria held her breath. "There was a misunderstanding with the CEO." "What kind of misunderstanding?" "She didn't know who I was. She thought the check was fake." "So you explained who you are?" Eventually, the girl's voice rose. "Dad, what did she do?" Marcus didn't answer immediately. When he spoke, his voice was heavy with something Victoria couldn't identify. Disappointment, maybe. Or exhaustion. "She tore up the check, Emma, in front of everyone." Silence. "She tore up $5 million, our donation for the children's wing." "Yes." "Because she didn't believe you could be rich. Because she didn't believe someone who looked like me could be rich." Victoria's heart clenched. Hearing her own prejudice described so simply, so matter-of-factly, stripped away every excuse she'd been building in her mind. "That's racist, Dad." "I know, sweetheart." "Are you going to sue her?" "No." "Why not? She humiliated you. She destroyed our donation. She—" "Emma." Marcus's voice was firm but kind. "Suing her won't change anything. It won't change what she believes. It won't make her see people differently." "Then what will—" "I don't know yet, but I'm hoping that consequences will teach her what lawsuits never could." "What consequences?" "Tomorrow morning there's a board meeting. I'm going to ask some questions about how this company treats people, not just me, everyone." "You're going to fire her." "That's not my decision alone. But I'm going to make sure this never happens again. Not at this hospital, not at this company, not anywhere connected to our name." Victoria heard movement inside the room. Footsteps approaching the door. She stepped back, suddenly aware that she was eavesdropping on a private conversation between a father and his sick child. But she wasn't fast enough. The door swung open. Marcus Thompson stood in the doorway, his expression shifting from surprise to recognition to something colder. "Ms. Sterling." "Mr. Thompson." Victoria's voice came out smaller than she intended. I came to apologize." At 11 o'clock at night, at my daughter's hospital room. "I know it's not appropriate. I know I should have waited, but I couldn't." She trailed off suddenly, aware of how pathetic she sounded. "You couldn't what?" "I couldn't sleep knowing what I did. I couldn't just sit in my penthouse and wait until morning." Marcus studied her for a long moment. His eyes were tired but sharp. The eyes of a man who'd seen too much to be easily fooled. "My daughter is awake," he said finally. "She heard your name. She wants to meet you." Victoria blinked. "She wants to meet me. She wants to see what kind of person does what you did." Marcus stepped aside. "Come in, Ms. Sterling, but be warned. Emma is more honest than I am, and she's not going to make this easy for you." Victoria hesitated on the threshold. Through the doorway, she could see a hospital bed, a tangle of IV lines, and a small figure propped against pillows. A girl with her father's eyes and her mother's stubborn chin. A girl dying from the same disease that had killed her mother. A girl whose treatment was funded by money that Victoria had tried to dismiss as fraud. Victoria took a deep breath and stepped into the room. Emma Thompson looked exactly like the photo in Sarah's files, except thinner. The treatment had taken its toll. Her skin was pale. Her arms were marked with needle scars. A knit cap covered what Victoria suspected was treatment-related hair loss. But her eyes were alive, fierce, unafraid. "So you're the one who tore up my dad's check?" Victoria stopped a few feet from the bed. "Yes, I am. He was going to name the children's wing after me. Did you know that? I do now. $5 million, ripped up like garbage, in front of cameras. Yes." Emma tilted her head, studying Victoria with uncomfortable intensity. "Why?" The question hung in the air. Simple, direct, devastating. "Because I made assumptions," Victoria said slowly. "Because I saw your father's clothes and decided he couldn't be wealthy. Because I judged him without knowing anything about him. Because he's black." Victoria flinched. I don't think... Dad told me what you said. Some people don't know their place. They exploit weakness. Our events, our spaces, our world." Emma's voice was steady. "I'm 14 years old, and I know what those words mean. Don't pretend you don't." Victoria opened her mouth to defend herself, then closed it. What could she say? The girl was right. Everything she'd said at the gala carried racial undertones she'd been too arrogant to acknowledge. "You're right," she said finally. "I made racist assumptions. I saw your father and I decided he didn't belong because of how he looked. There's no excuse for that." "Is that supposed to be an apology?" "It's supposed to be the truth." Emma looked at her father, who stood silently by the window. Then back at Victoria. "My mom used to say that apologies without action are just words, just noise people make to feel better about themselves." Victoria felt the weight of that statement settle on her shoulders. "Your mother sounds like she was a wise woman." "She was. She also had this disease." Emma gestured at the IV lines, the monitoring equipment, the clinical sterility of the room. "She died 3 years ago, right here in this hospital, in a room down the hall." "I'm sorry. Everyone's sorry. Sorry doesn't cure anything." Emma's voice hardened. "But money does. Research does. Treatments that your company developed with donations that my father gave. Donations that I had no idea came from him. That's the point, isn't it?" Emma leaned forward slightly. "He gave anonymously. He didn't want credit. He just wanted to help kids like me." And when he finally showed up in person, when he tried to give even more, you treated him like a criminal." Victoria had no response. Every word from this dying 14-year-old girl cut deeper than any board meeting ever could. "My father worked as a janitor for 12 years, Emma continued. "Even after he inherited billions. Even after he could have retired and never worked another day. Do you know why? No. Because he wanted to stay connected to real people, regular people, people who don't judge each other by their clothes or their cars or their zip codes." Emma's eyes never left Victoria's face. He wanted to remember what it felt like to be invisible, so he'd never treat anyone else that way. Victoria felt tears building behind her eyes. She blinked them back, knowing she had no right to cry. Not here. Not in front of this girl who had every reason to hate her. "I was wrong," Victoria said, her voice barely a whisper. "I was wrong about everything." "Yes, you were. I don't know how to fix this." "You can't fix it." Emma settled back against her pillows, suddenly looking very tired. "You can't untear the check. You can't unsay the words. You can't make the internet forget what you did." "Then what can I do?" Emma looked at her father again. Something passed between them. A silent conversation that Victoria couldn't read. "You can change," Emma said finally. "Not just apologize. Actually change. Change how you see people. Change how your company treats people. Change everything you thought you knew about who deserves respect." "I don't know if I can do that." "Then you're not really sorry. You're just scared of consequences." The words hit Victoria like a physical blow. Because Emma was right. Everything she'd done tonight, coming to the hospital, finding Marcus standing in this room, all of it was about managing consequences. Saving her job. Protecting her reputation. Not one moment had been about genuinely understanding what she'd done wrong. "You're right," Victoria admitted. "I came here for the wrong reasons." Emma nodded slowly. "At least you're honest about it now. That's something. What would the right reasons be?" "I don't know. Maybe wanting to be a better person. Not because you got caught being a bad one, but because you actually want to change who you are." Victoria looked at this girl, this 14-year-old dying child, and saw more wisdom than she'd encountered in decades of corporate boardrooms. "I don't know who I am anymore," Victoria said quietly. "Tonight showed me something about myself I didn't want to see." "Then look at it anyway." Emma's voice softened slightly. "That's what Dad always says. Look at the ugly parts of yourself. Don't pretend they're not there. Face them. Then decide if that's who you want to be." Marcus stepped forward, touching his daughter's shoulder. "That's enough for tonight, sweetheart. You need rest." "I know, Dad." Emma looked at Victoria one last time. "I don't forgive you. I'm not ready. Maybe I never will be. But I hope you actually try to change. Not for yourself. For everyone else who looks at you and sees power. Show them what power can do when it's used for good instead of judgment." Victoria nodded, not trusting herself to speak. "Good night, Ms. Sterling." Victoria turned and walked toward the door. Behind her, she heard Marcus speaking softly to his daughter, adjusting her blankets, checking her medications. At the doorway, she paused. "Mr. Thompson." He looked up. "I'll see you at the board meeting tomorrow, and I want you to know, whatever you decide, whatever happens, I won't fight it. I'll accept whatever consequences the board determines." Marcus studied her for a long moment. "That's not for you to decide, Ms. Sterling. That's for the people you've hurt, and the people who depend on this company to do the right thing." "I understand. Do you—" He walked toward her, stopping just inside the doorway. "Because here's what I think. I think you've spent your whole life surrounded by people who look like you, think like you, judge like you. And tonight was the first time anyone held up a mirror and showed you what that looks like from the other side. Maybe you're right. I am right. The question is what you do now. Do you shatter the mirror and go back to pretending? Or do you look at yourself honestly and decide to become someone different?" Victoria didn't answer. She didn't have an answer. "Go home, Ms. Sterling. Get some sleep. Tomorrow will be difficult." Victoria nodded and walked away, leaving Marcus Thompson standing in the doorway of his daughter's hospital room. Behind her, the quiet beeping of monitors continued their steady rhythm. The sound of a life hanging in the balance. The sound of consequences measured not in dollars or stock prices, but in breaths and heartbeats. Victoria Sterling walked through the silent halls of the hospital that bore her family name. Past rooms filled with sick children and worried parents. Past nurses working the night shift. Past the memorial wall listing donors who had given their money to save lives. She stopped in front of the wall, scanned the names, found what she was looking for. Anonymous donor. $847 million. Pediatric Research Wing. Oncology equipment. Clinical trial funding. Marcus Thompson. The janitor. The billionaire. The man she had dismissed as worthless. He had given more to this hospital than Victoria's entire family had given in 3 generations, and she had torn up his check on camera. Victoria pressed her hand against the wall, feeling the weight of every name, every donation, every life saved by people who gave without expecting recognition. Tomorrow she would face the board. Tomorrow she would learn her fate. Tomorrow everything might change. But tonight she stood alone in the hospital hallway, finally understanding what Marcus Thompson had known all along. Worth isn't measured by clothes or skin color or the size of someone's bank account. Worth is measured by how you treat people when you think no one is watching. And Victoria Sterling had failed that test spectacularly. The question now was whether she could ever pass it again. Victoria didn't sleep that night. She sat in her penthouse, watching the view count climb. 500,000, 750,000, 1 million. By dawn, the video had been viewed 2 million times and shared across every major news outlet in the country. The headlines were brutal. Sterling Pharmaceuticals CEO caught on camera in racist tirade. Billionaire janitor humiliated by woman who works for him. The $5 million check that exposed corporate America's ugliest secret. Sarah called at 6 a.m. with an update Victoria didn't want to hear. 3 institutional investors have already announced they're reviewing their positions. 2 civil rights organizations are preparing formal complaints. And CNN wants a statement before the morning shows. "No statement," Victoria said. "Not until after the board meeting." "Victoria, the silence is making it worse. People think you're hiding." "I am hiding. I'm hiding from myself." Victoria stared at her reflection in the darkened window. "What time is it?" 6:15. "The meeting is at 9. "Yes." "Then I have less than 3 hours to figure out who I want to be." She hung up before Sarah could respond. At 8:45 a.m., Victoria Sterling walked into the Sterling Pharmaceuticals headquarters for what might be the last time. The lobby that usually buzzed with respectful greetings fell silent as she passed. Employees who normally smiled and waved suddenly found their phones fascinating. Security guards who had known her for years avoided eye contact. She was already a ghost. They just hadn't buried her yet. The boardroom occupied the entire top floor of the building. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Manhattan. A mahogany table that seated 20. Leather chairs worth more than most people's cars. Victoria had always loved this room. It represented everything she'd achieved. Power, success, control. Today it felt like a courtroom. The board members were already seated when she arrived. Charles Whitmore at the head of the table, his expression carved from stone. Margaret Chen, the longest-serving female board member, refusing to meet Victoria's eyes. David Rothstein, the youngest member, scrolling through his phone with barely concealed disgust. And at the far end of the table, Marcus Thompson. He wore the same simple suit from last night, the same scuffed shoes, the same calm expression that Victoria now understood was not simplicity, but strength. He nodded once as she entered but said nothing. "Please sit down, Victoria," Charles said. His voice held no warmth. We have a great deal to discuss." Victoria took her usual seat, though it no longer felt like hers. The chair that had always represented authority now felt like a defendant's bench. "Before we begin," Charles continued, "I want to establish something clearly. This meeting was called by Mr. Thompson in his capacity as our largest individual shareholder. He has the floor for as long as he needs it. Is that understood?" Murmurs of agreement from around the table. "Mr. Thompson, please proceed." Marcus stood slowly. He didn't move to the presentation screen or pull out notes. He simply stood at his place at the table and looked at each board member in turn. "Thank you, Charles. I'll try to be brief, though this situation doesn't lend itself to brevity." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "Last night, I attended the Sterling Pharmaceuticals charity gala. I've attended many such events over the years, always anonymously. I prefer it that way. I don't need recognition for my contributions. I give because giving is right, not because I want applause." Victoria felt the weight of every word pressing down on her chest. "But last night, I decided to come forward, to present a donation publicly, to finally put a face to the Thompson Family Trust." Marcus's voice remained steady. "I wanted to name the new children's oncology wing after my daughter Emma. She's 14 years old. She has Hartman's disease, the same condition that killed her mother 3 years ago. The same condition that Sterling Pharmaceuticals has been developing treatments for, funded in large part by my anonymous donations." Margaret Chen closed her eyes briefly. David Rothstein stopped scrolling. "I walked into that gala wearing clothes from a thrift store. I drove myself in a 12-year-old Honda. I didn't announce myself or demand special treatment. I simply walked in like any other guest and presented my invitation." He turned to look directly at Victoria. "And within minutes, I was surrounded by security, accused of fraud, called a thief, told that I didn't know my place, and I watched as the CEO of this company, the company I have invested over $800 million in, tore up my $5 million check and scattered the pieces at my feet." The silence in the boardroom was absolute. "I could sue," Marcus continued. "My lawyers have already drafted preliminary complaints. Defamation, discrimination, public humiliation. The damages would be substantial. The publicity would be devastating." Victoria's hands gripped the arms of her chair. "But I'm not going to sue. That's not why I called this meeting." Charles leaned forward. "Then why are you here, Mr. Thompson?" "I'm here because what happened to me last night wasn't unique. It wasn't a one-time incident. It was a symptom of something much larger, something embedded in the culture of this company and companies like it." Marcus walked slowly around the table, his presence commanding attention without demanding it. "I've been a janitor for 12 years. I clean floors and empty trash cans and scrub toilets. And in those 12 years, I've learned more about how people really think than I ever learned in any boardroom." He stopped behind Victoria's chair. She could feel him there without turning around. "Do you know what I've learned? I've learned that most people treat janitors like furniture. They have conversations in front of us like we don't exist. They make jokes they'd never make if they thought anyone important was listening. They reveal who they really are because they think we don't matter enough to notice." Victoria's throat tightened. "Last night, Ms. Sterling treated me exactly the way thousands of people have treated me over the past 12 years. She saw my clothes and made assumptions. She saw my skin and made judgments. She saw a janitor and decided I was worthless." He moved back to his place at the table. "The difference is that last night there were cameras. Last night the whole world got to see what usually happens in private. And now this company has a choice to make." Charles cleared his throat. "What choice are you proposing, Mr. Thompson?" "Two options. The first is simple. Ms. Sterling resigns immediately. The board issues a public apology. Life goes on more or less as before. The scandal fades. The stock price recovers. Everyone pretends this was an isolated incident involving one bad actor." Victoria's heart hammered in her chest. "And the second option?" Charles asked. Marcus looked at Victoria for a long moment before answering. The second option is harder, much harder, but it's the only one that actually changes anything. He pulled a folder from his jacket pocket and placed it on the table. This is a comprehensive plan for cultural reform at Sterling Pharmaceuticals. New hiring practices, mandatory training programs, independent monitoring systems, community advisory boards, transparent reporting on diversity and inclusion metrics. David Rothstein reached for the folder, flipping through its pages with growing interest. Implementation would cost approximately $50 million over 3 years, Marcus continued. I'm prepared to fund it entirely through the Thompson Family Trust. In exchange, I want 3 things. Name them, Charles said. First, Ms. Sterling stays. Victoria's head snapped up. She stared at Marcus in disbelief. She stays, Marcus repeated, but not as CEO. She steps down to a newly created position, Chief Culture Officer. Her only job for the next 2 years will be implementing these reforms, attending the training sessions, meeting with community leaders, learning what she should have learned long before last night. You want to keep her? Margaret Chen asked, clearly confused. I want to transform her. There's a difference. Marcus turned to face Victoria directly. Firing you would be easy. It would make headlines. It would satisfy the people calling for blood. But it wouldn't change anything. You'd be gone, but the culture that created you would remain. Victoria found her voice. Why? After what I did to you, why would you want me to stay? Because my daughter asked me a question last night after you left the hospital. She asked what would actually make things better, not what would feel satisfying, not what would punish you, what would actually create change. He sat back down, folding his hands on the table. I've thought about it all night, and I realized that the answer isn't revenge, it's redemption. Not for your sake, Ms. Sterling, for everyone who looks at you and sees power, everyone who will watch what happens next and learn from it. Charles looked around the table. And your other 2 conditions. Second, the Children's Oncology Wing will be named the Emma and Catherine Thompson Center. My daughter and my wife, both victims of the disease your company is working to cure. Done, Charles said immediately. And the third, Marcus paused. When he spoke again, his voice was softer. My daughter is running out of time. The standard treatment protocol isn't working as well as hoped. There's an experimental therapy still in trials that might give her a better chance. I want Sterling Pharmaceuticals to expedite her access to that therapy. That's a medical decision, Margaret said carefully. There are protocols, ethical considerations. I'm not asking you to skip the protocols. I'm asking you to prioritize. My daughter has weeks, maybe months. The therapy could give her years. Marcus's composure finally cracked just slightly. I've given this company $800 million. I'm offering $50 million more. I'm not asking for special treatment. I'm asking for hope. The boardroom fell silent again. Victoria watched Marcus's face, seeing for the first time the exhaustion behind his strength, the fear behind his calm, the father behind the investor. I'll make some calls, Margaret said quietly. We'll see what can be done. Thank you. Charles looked at Victoria. You've heard Mr. Thompson's proposal. What do you say? Victoria stood slowly. Her legs felt unsteady, but she forced herself to meet Marcus's eyes. Last night I called you a fraud. I said you didn't know your place. I tore up your check and scattered it at your feet like garbage. Her voice cracked, but she continued. I did those things because I thought I knew who you were based on how you looked. I saw a black man in cheap clothes and decided you were worthless, that you were less than me, that you didn't deserve to be in the same room as me. Tears slid down her cheeks. She didn't wipe them away. I was wrong, not just factually wrong, morally wrong. I've spent my entire career building power, and I never stopped to think about who I was stepping on to get it, who I was dismissing, who I was treating as invisible. She turned to face the full board. I accept Mr. Thompson's conditions, all of them, not because I'm afraid of losing my job or my reputation, Because he's right. Firing me would be easy. It would let everyone feel good for a moment, but it wouldn't change anything. She looked at Marcus again. I want to change. I don't know if I can. I don't know if it's possible to unlearn 52 years of assumptions and prejudices. But I want to try. Not for myself. For every person I've dismissed without knowing. Every janitor I've walked past without seeing. Every person I've judged by their clothes or their skin or their job title. Victoria sat back down exhausted. That's my answer. Whatever you decide, I'll accept. Charles looked around the table. We'll vote. All in favor of accepting Mr. Thompson's proposal. One by one hands rose. Margaret, David, the others. Finally, Charles himself. The motion passes unanimously. Charles turned to Marcus. Mr. Thompson, on behalf of this board, I want to apologize for what happened to you. Not just last night, but for all the times this company failed to create a culture where last night would have been impossible. Thank you, Charles, but I don't need apologies. I need action. Marcus stood. The reform plan has a timeline. I expect weekly progress reports, and I expect to see Ms. Sterling at the first community meeting next week. I'll be there, Victoria said quietly. Marcus gathered his folder and moved toward the door. Then he stopped. One more thing. The video from last night is still spreading. By the end of today, it will have been seen by 10 million people. That's 10 million people who watched me get humiliated. Who watched a wealthy white woman treat a black man like a criminal. He turned to face the room. I can't undo that. No one can. But I can control what comes next. So I'm going to hold a press conference this afternoon. I'm going to tell everyone what happened last night and what's happening now. I'm going to show them that consequences matter, but redemption matters more. Victoria's breath caught. I'm going to ask you to stand beside me, Ms. Sterling. Not to defend yourself. Not to make excuses. Just to show people that you're willing to face what you did and work to become someone different. I'll be there, Victoria said again. Marcus nodded once and walked out of the boardroom. The door closed behind him. Victoria sat in the silence that followed, feeling the weight of what had just happened settle over her like a second skin. She was no longer CEO. She was no longer the most powerful person in this building. Everything she'd spent her life building had been stripped away in one night. And somehow, impossibly, she felt lighter. Charles stood. We have a lot of work to do. Victoria, I suggest you start reviewing Mr. Thompson's reform plan. You'll be the one implementing it. Yes, Charles. And Victoria? He paused at the door. What Mr. Thompson is offering you is more than you deserve. Don't waste it. He left. The other board members followed one by one until Victoria sat alone in the empty boardroom. She pulled Marcus's folder toward her and began reading. The plan was comprehensive, detailed, thoughtful. It addressed hiring practices and promotion policies and customer service protocols and community engagement and employee training and a dozen other areas Victoria had never thought to examine. Every page was a mirror reflecting back all the ways she'd failed without knowing it. All the systems she'd perpetuated without questioning. All the people she'd harmed without seeing. She read for 2 hours, making notes, highlighting sections, forcing herself to confront every uncomfortable truth. At noon, Sarah appeared at the door. The press conference is in 2 hours. Mr. Thompson's team sent over talking points. I don't need talking points. Victoria, this is going to be the most watched press conference of the year. You need to be prepared. I am prepared. Victoria closed the folder. I'm going to tell the truth. All of it. No spin, no deflection. Just the truth about who I was and who I'm trying to become. That's risky. Everything worth doing is risky. Victoria stood smoothing her clothes. Do I look like someone who just lost everything and found something better? Sarah studied her for a long moment. You look different. I can't explain how, but different. Good. That's exactly right. The press conference was held in the hospital lobby in front of the donor wall where Marcus Thompson's anonymous contributions were listed. Hundreds of reporters filled the space. Cameras from every major network pointed at the small stage. Marcus stood at the podium, Victoria beside him. Behind them, the words, "Anonymous donor $847 million" were visible to everyone watching. "Thank you all for coming," Marcus began. "Last night something happened that I think speaks to a larger truth about our society. A truth about assumptions and prejudice, and the distance between who we think we are and who we actually are." He told the story simply. The gala, the check, the accusations, the tearing, the revelation. "I could have walked away angry," he continued. "I could have sued. I could have demanded Ms. Sterling's termination and called it justice. But that wouldn't have changed anything. It would have satisfied my ego without addressing the problem." He gestured for Victoria to step forward. "Instead, I chose to believe that people can change, that institutions can change, that the same power that was used to humiliate me last night can be redirected toward healing." Victoria took the podium. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice was clear. "Last night I made assumptions about a man based on the color of his skin and the cost of his clothes. I called him a fraud. I called him a criminal. I tore up his donation and scattered it at his feet. And I did it all in front of cameras because I was so certain I was right that I wanted everyone to see." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "I was wrong, completely, fundamentally, shamefully wrong. Not just about who Marcus Thompson was, but about who I was. I thought I was someone who judged people fairly. I thought I was someone who saw past surfaces to the person underneath. I thought I was better than the prejudices I grew up with." Tears glistened in her eyes. "I wasn't. I'm not. But I want to be." She turned to look at Marcus. "This man who I treated as worthless has offered me something I don't deserve. A chance to change. Not just to apologize, but to actually become someone different. Someone who sees people instead of assumptions. Someone who asks questions instead of making judgments. Someone who uses power to lift up instead of push down." She faced the cameras again. "I don't know if I can succeed. Change is hard, especially when you're changing beliefs you didn't even know you held. But I'm going to try, not because I'm afraid of consequences. Because Marcus Thompson showed me that redemption matters more than revenge, and I want to prove him right." The questions came fast and sharp after that. Reporters demanding details, accountability timelines. Victoria answered everyone honestly, even when the truth was painful. Especially when the truth was painful. When it was over, she and Marcus stood together as the crowd dispersed. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for giving me a chance I don't deserve." "You're welcome." Marcus looked at her with those calm, assessing eyes. "But don't thank me yet. The real work starts now, and it's going to be harder than anything you've ever done." "I know." "Do you?" Because implementing a reform plan is one thing. Changing who you are is something else entirely. It means looking at yourself honestly every single day. It means admitting when you fail. It means starting over again and again until the change becomes real. "I understand." "I hope so." He turned to leave, then paused. "Emma wants to see you again. She has more questions." Victoria's heart clenched. "I'd like that, if she's willing." "She's willing. She doesn't forgive you yet, but she believes people can change." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. She learned that from her mother. He walked away, leaving Victoria standing alone in the hospital lobby. Around her, the normal rhythms of the hospital continued. Doctors rushing between patients, families waiting for news, children in wheelchairs being pushed by volunteer aides. Victoria watched them all, seeing them in a way she never had before, not as obstacles or background noise or people beneath her notice, as human beings, each with their own story, their own worth, their own dignity. It was a small change, invisible to anyone watching. But Victoria felt it like a seismic shift. For the first time in her life, she was actually seeing the world instead of just looking at it. And she understood finally what Marcus Thompson had known all along. Real power wasn't about status or money or position. Real power was about how you treated people when you thought no one was watching. Victoria had failed that test spectacularly, but she had a chance now to take it again. And this time, she was determined to pass. 3 weeks passed. Victoria Sterling learned what it meant to be invisible. She arrived at the Southside Community Center at 7 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, wearing jeans and a simple blouse. No designer labels. No jewelry except her watch. Her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. The center director, a 63-year-old woman named Dorothy Washington, looked her up and down without smiling. "You're the CEO who tore up that man's check." "Former CEO, yes." "And now you're here to learn about diversity." Dorothy's voice dripped with skepticism. "In my community center, where I've been fighting for resources for 30 years while people like you threw galas and congratulated yourselves." Victoria felt the words land like physical blows. "I'm here because Marcus Thompson believes I can change. I'm trying to prove him right." "Marcus is a good man, better than most, better than you deserve." Dorothy gestured toward the main room. "The morning program starts in 20 minutes. You'll be helping serve breakfast to seniors. After that, you'll assist with the children's literacy program, then lunch service, then afternoon activities. You'll be here until 6 p.m., same as everyone else." "I understand." "Do you?" "Because this isn't a photo opportunity. This isn't something you do for a week and then write about in your memoir. These are real people with real needs, and they don't care about your redemption arc." Victoria met her eyes steadily. "I know. That's why I'm here." Dorothy studied her for a long moment. "We'll see. Kitchen's through there. Hairnets required." Victoria spent the next 11 hours doing work she'd never imagined herself doing, serving oatmeal to elderly residents who looked through her like she wasn't there, reading picture books to 5-year-olds who squirmed and fidgeted and asked why her voice sounded funny, mopping floors after a child spilled juice across the cafeteria. By the end of the day, her feet ached, her back screamed, her designer watch felt absurd on her wrist. Dorothy found her sitting alone in the empty cafeteria, staring at her blistered hands. "First day's always the hardest." Victoria looked up. "How do you do this every day? How do you keep going when there's so much need and so few resources?" "Because someone has to. Because these people matter even if the rest of the world pretends they don't." Dorothy sat down across from her. "You asked me how I do it. Let me ask you something. Why are you really here?" "I told you, Marcus Thompson." "I know what Marcus wants. I'm asking what you want. Because if you're just going through the motions to save your career, you might as well leave now. These people can smell insincerity from a mile away." Victoria was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "I'm here because 3 weeks ago, I looked at a man and saw nothing. I saw his clothes and his skin and decided he was worthless. And I was so certain, so absolutely convinced that I performed my contempt for an audience. I wanted people to watch me put him in his place." She looked at her blistered hands again. "I'm here because I need to understand how I became that person. And I need to become someone else." Dorothy nodded slowly. "That's a better answer. Still not good enough, but better." What would be good enough? When you stop asking that question, when you stop looking for the finish line and just do the work because it needs doing. Dorothy stood. "Same time tomorrow. And wear better shoes." Victoria returned the next day, and the day after that, and the day after that. She learned to serve food without condescension. She learned to read stories without checking her phone. She learned names and faces and histories. Mrs. Patterson, who'd worked as a nurse for 40 years, and now struggled to afford her medications. James Wilson, a 7-year-old who couldn't read, but could solve math problems in his head faster than Victoria could type them into a calculator. Maria Gonzalez, a single mother of 3, who walked 4 miles each day to bring her children to the literacy program. Real people, real lives, real struggles that Victoria had never known existed. And slowly, painfully, something began to shift inside her. 4 weeks into her community service, Marcus Thompson appeared at the center. He found Victoria in the kitchen, elbow deep in dishwater scrubbing pots from the lunch service. "You've been here every day," he said. Victoria looked up startled. "The agreement was 3 days a week, but Dorothy needed help with the extra programming, so I've been coming in whenever I can. I heard. Dorothy called me. She said you've been surprising her. Is that good or bad? She said you actually listen, that you don't talk about yourself or make everything about your journey. You just show up and work." Marcus leaned against the counter. "She also said you cried in the bathroom last week after Mrs. Patterson told you about losing her son to a police shooting." Victoria's hands stilled in the water. "I didn't know anyone saw that." "Dorothy sees everything. It's why she's survived in this work for 30 years. Victoria returned to scrubbing, not trusting herself to speak. "How's Emma?" she finally asked. "The experimental treatment started last week. It's too early to know if it's working, but she's responding better than expected. The doctors are cautiously optimistic." "I'm glad. She asks about you, wants to know if you're actually changing or just pretending." Victoria set down the pot and turned to face him. "What do you tell her?" "I tell her I don't know yet. That change takes time. That actions matter more than words." He paused. "What would you tell her?" Victoria thought about the question seriously before answering. "I'd tell her that 3 weeks ago I didn't understand why any of this mattered. I thought showing up and doing the work was enough. I thought I could check boxes and complete requirements and call it transformation. And now I understand that the work isn't about me at all. It's about Mrs. Patterson and James and Maria and everyone else who comes through these doors. It's about seeing them as people instead of problems to be solved or statistics to be managed." She picked up another pot and began scrubbing. "I'd tell Emma that I'm not pretending, but I'm also not transformed. I'm somewhere in between trying to figure out who I want to be. And I don't know if I'll ever fully get there, but I know I can't go back to who I was." Marcus watched her work in silence for a moment. "Emma wants to see you again. She has something she wants to say." "When?" "Tonight. If you're not too tired." Victoria looked at her wrinkled hands, her stained clothes, her aching body. "I'll be there." That evening, Victoria walked into room 412 of Sterling Memorial Hospital for the second time. Emma Thompson sat propped against pillows, looking thinner than before, but with brighter eyes. "You came. Your father said you wanted to see me." "I wanted to ask you something." Emma gestured for Victoria to sit. "My dad says you've been working at the community center every day, even though you only had to go 3 times a week." "That's right." "Why?" Victoria considered the question. "Because I'm learning things I should have learned a long time ago. About people, about myself, about what actually matters." "Like what?" "Like the fact that I spent 52 years thinking I understood the world and I didn't understand anything. I thought success meant power and money and status. I thought I was better than people who had less than me. I thought my achievements made me valuable, and other people's struggles made them weak." Emma listened without interrupting. "I was wrong about all of it. Success isn't about what you accumulate. It's about what you contribute. And I haven't contributed anything real in my entire life. I've just taken and convinced myself I deserved it." "That's pretty harsh." "It's the truth. The community center taught me that. Every person there has overcome more obstacles in a single year than I've faced in my whole life. And they don't complain. They don't feel sorry for themselves. They just keep going, keep fighting, keep showing up for each other. Victoria leaned forward slightly. Your father does that too. He could have retired years ago. He could have lived in a mansion and never worked another day. Instead, he chose to mop floors so he wouldn't forget what real life looks like, so he wouldn't become like me. Emma was quiet for a moment. I was pretty hard on you that first night. You were honest. That's not the same thing. My mom used to say that honesty without compassion is just cruelty. Emma's voice softened. I think I was cruel to you. You were a 14-year-old girl defending your father from someone who had just humiliated him. You had every right to be angry. Maybe, but anger doesn't change anything. Dad taught me that. Emma pulled a folded piece of paper from under her pillow. I wrote you something. It's probably stupid, but I wanted you to have it. Victoria took the paper carefully. Inside was a handwritten letter, the writing shaky but determined. Dear Ms. Sterling, Emma had written, I've been thinking about what you said that night in my hospital room, about not knowing who you are anymore. I think that's actually a good thing. My mom used to say that the most dangerous people are the ones who are certain they're right. She said growth only happens when we're willing to be wrong. Victoria's eyes blurred with tears. I don't forgive you for what you did to my dad. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I believe you're trying to change, and I think that matters. My dad always says that who we become is more important than who we were. So maybe instead of focusing on the person you used to be, you should focus on the person you want to become. This is the hardest part to write, but I want to say it anyway. Thank you for not giving up. Thank you for showing up at the community center even when you didn't have to. Thank you for trying to be different. That takes courage that I'm not sure I would have. My mom died believing that everyone deserves second chances. I'm trying to believe that too. So this is me giving you a second chance. Don't waste it. Victoria finished reading and sat motionless, tears streaming down her face. You don't have to cry, Emma said softly. It's just a letter. It's not just a letter. Victoria's voice broke. It's the most important thing anyone has ever said to me. Really? Really, because you didn't have to write it. You didn't have to give me anything. You had every reason to hate me forever. Victoria looked up at the 14-year-old girl who had somehow become her teacher. Why didn't you? Emma shrugged slightly. Because hate is heavy, and I'm already carrying enough. The words hit Victoria harder than any criticism ever had. This child, facing a disease that might kill her, had chosen to release her anger rather than carry it. Had chosen growth over grudge. Had chosen to see possibility in someone who had given her no reason to hope. I don't deserve your second chance, Victoria said quietly. Maybe not. But that's kind of the point, isn't it? Second chances aren't about deserving. They're about becoming. Marcus appeared in the doorway. Everything okay in here? We're good, Dad. Emma smiled weakly. I think Ms. Sterling and I understand each other better now. Victoria stood clutching Emma's letter like a lifeline. Thank you. For this. For everything. Just don't waste it, Emma repeated. That's all I ask. Victoria nodded and walked past Marcus into the hallway. He followed her. What did she give you? Victoria handed him the letter. He read it slowly, his expression shifting from curiosity to wonder to something that looked like pride. She wrote this herself. I didn't know. Your daughter is extraordinary. She's her mother's child. Marcus handed the letter back. Catherine would have written something similar. She believed in redemption more than anyone I've ever known. They walked together toward the hospital exit. Can I ask you something? Victoria said. Go ahead. That night at the gala, when I was tearing up your check, humiliating you in front of everyone, what were you thinking? Marcus was quiet for a long moment. I was thinking about Catherine. About what she would want me to do. She always said that anger is a fire that burns the person carrying it. She said the best revenge against people who hurt you is to become someone they could never be. What does that mean? It means I didn't want to destroy you. I wanted to transform you. I wanted to take the worst moment of your life and turn it into the beginning of something better. He stopped walking and turned to face her. Not for your sake. For everyone watching. For everyone who would see what happened next and learn from it. You planned this from the beginning. I hoped for it. I didn't know if you were capable of change. Some people aren't. But I believed you might be. Why? After everything I did. Because you came to the hospital that night. You didn't have to. You could have hidden in your penthouse and waited for your lawyers to fix everything. But instead, you came to face me, to face Emma, to face what you'd done. Marcus started walking again. That told me something about you. Something you probably didn't even know about yourself. It told me that underneath all the arrogance and prejudice, there was someone who wanted to be better, who couldn't live with who she was. I'm still not sure I can be better. Neither am I, but I'm willing to find out. He stopped at the hospital exit. The reform implementation meeting is tomorrow morning. The board wants a progress report. Will you be ready? I'll be ready. Good, because this is where the real work begins. Community service and sensitivity training are just the foundation, actually changing how a company operates, how people think, how systems function. That's the hard part. I know. Do you? Because you're going to face resistance. From employees who don't want to change. From board members who think this is all a PR stunt. From people who believe you're still the same person who tore up my check. What do I do about them? You prove them wrong. Not with words, with actions. Every day, every decision, every interaction. You show them that change is possible. Marcus pushed open the door. Or you fail. And then we'll know I was wrong about you. He walked into the night, leaving Victoria standing alone in the hospital lobby. She looked down at Emma's letter, still clutched in her hand. The words blurred through her tears, but she'd already memorized them. Second chances aren't about deserving. They're about becoming. Victoria folded the letter carefully and placed it in her pocket close to her heart. Tomorrow, she would face the board. Tomorrow, she would present her progress. Tomorrow, she would defend decisions that many people thought she had no right to make. But tonight, she had something more important. She had a second chance she didn't deserve. And she was determined not to waste it. The next morning, Victoria arrived at Sterling Pharmaceuticals headquarters 2 hours before the meeting. She'd spent the night reviewing every detail of the reform implementation, preparing answers for questions she hoped no one would ask. Sarah met her in the lobby. You look different. I feel different. The board is nervous. The stock price dropped another 3% yesterday. Investors are asking questions. What kind of questions? Whether the reforms are worth the cost. Whether you're the right person to implement them. Whether Marcus Thompson's influence is good for the company long term. Victoria nodded. Anything else? Charles Whitmore wants to meet with you privately before the full board session. He said it's urgent. Victoria found Charles in his office standing at the window with his back to the door. You wanted to see me. He turned slowly. His expression was troubled. I've been on this board for 23 years. I've seen CEOs come and go. I've seen scandals and recoveries and everything in between. But I've never seen anything like this. Like what? Like you. The Victoria Sterling I knew 3 weeks ago would never have spent her days at a community center. Would never have served breakfast to seniors or read books to children. Would never have accepted a demotion without fighting it. Maybe you didn't know me as well as you thought. Maybe I didn't. Charles sat down heavily. Or maybe Marcus Thompson is performing some kind of miracle that I don't understand. It's not a miracle, it's a choice. One I make every day. That's what worries me. Victoria frowned. Why? Because choices can be unmade. Because the pressure you're under right now is nothing compared to what's coming. Because eventually, you're going to face a moment where doing the right thing costs you something real, and I need to know you won't fold. What moment? Charles slid a folder across his desk. Read this. Victoria opened it. Inside was a detailed financial analysis projecting the cost of the reform implementation. The numbers were staggering. $50 million is the starting point, Charles said. Full implementation could cost twice that, and some of our major investors are threatening to pull out if we don't abandon the program. Who? Hartley Capital, Meridian Partners. Together they hold 18% of the company. And they want to kill the reforms. They want to kill the reforms, remove Marcus Thompson's influence, and return to business as usual. They've already approached other board members with a counter-proposal. Victoria felt her stomach tighten. What counter-proposal? Reinstate you as CEO. Reduce the reform program to cosmetic changes. Issue a formal apology to Marcus Thompson and offer him a quiet buyout of his shares. They want to erase everything we've started. They want to protect their investment. They don't care about transformation or redemption or cultural change. They care about profit margins and stock prices. Victoria closed the folder. What do you want me to do? I want you to understand what's at stake. If you fight this, you might lose. The board might side with the investors. Everything you've worked for could disappear. And if I don't fight, then you get your old life back, your title, your salary, your power. All you have to do is agree that the reforms were a mistake and promise to return things to normal. Victoria stood and walked to the window. Outside Manhattan sprawled beneath her the same view she'd admired from her penthouse, the same city she'd thought she owned. 3 weeks ago I would have taken that deal without hesitation. And now I have a letter in my pocket from a 14-year-old girl who's fighting for her life. She gave me a second chance that I didn't deserve. She asked me not to waste it. Victoria turned to face Charles. I'm not going to waste it. Not for profit margins. Not for stock prices, not for anything. Even if it costs you everything. Especially then. Because if I can be bought, if I can be pressured into abandoning what's right, then nothing I've done in the past 3 weeks means anything. Then Marcus Thompson was wrong about me. Then Emma Thompson's second chance was wasted. She walked toward the door. Tell Hartley Capital and Meridian Partners that the reforms continue. Tell them I'll present a full implementation plan to the board this morning, and tell them that if they want to fight me on this, they're welcome to try. Charles almost smiled. The old Victoria Sterling would never have said that. The old Victoria Sterling is dead. Victoria paused at the doorway. I killed her myself. She walked out without looking back. The board meeting started at 9 a.m. sharp. Victoria presented her progress report with a confidence she didn't entirely feel. The community center work, the sensitivity training sessions, the new hiring protocols already showing results, the customer service reforms reducing complaints by 30%. When she finished, Hartley Capital's representative, a sharp-eyed man named Richard Crane, raised his hand. Ms. Sterling, these reforms are costing this company significant resources. When do we see a return on investment? The return on investment is a company culture that doesn't humiliate customers based on their appearance. A workforce that respects everyone who walks through our doors. A reputation rebuilt on actions rather than press releases. Those are intangibles. I'm asking about numbers. Then here are your numbers. Victoria pulled up a new slide. Customer satisfaction up 22% since the reforms began. Employee retention up 15%. New account applications up 31%, with significant growth in previously underserved communities. She looked directly at Crane. Those are returns on investment. The question is whether you're willing to invest in doing the right thing or only in doing the profitable thing. In my experience, they're often the same thing. And in my experience, they're often not. Which is why we're having this conversation. Marcus Thompson, seated at the end of the table, spoke for the first time. I have a question for Mr. Crane. The room fell silent. When you evaluated your position in this company, did you consider the long-term costs of maintaining a discriminatory culture? The lawsuits that were settled quietly, the talent that walked away, the customers who took their business elsewhere because they didn't feel respected? Crane shifted uncomfortably. Those are difficult to quantify. They're difficult to quantify because no one wanted to count them, because it was easier to pretend the problem didn't exist. Marcus stood slowly. I've invested $800 million in this company over 5 years. I did it anonymously because I didn't want my race to influence how my money was treated. And the night I showed up in person, the CEO of my own company called me a fraud and tore up my check. He let the silence stretch. That's the cost of the culture you're defending, Mr. Crane. That's what your profit margins purchased. The question is whether you want to keep paying that price or whether you're willing to invest in something better. The vote was held 30 minutes later. The reforms would continue. Victoria Sterling would remain as Chief Culture Officer. Hartley Capital and Meridian Partners could accept the decision or sell their shares. When the meeting ended, Marcus found Victoria in the hallway. You stood up to them, even knowing what it might cost you. Your daughter gave me a second chance. I couldn't waste it. Marcus nodded slowly. Catherine used to say that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what's right even when you're terrified. I was terrified. I know. That's what made it courage. He started walking toward the elevator. Emma's having a good day today. The treatment seems to be working. She asked if you'd come by later. Victoria felt something warm spread through her chest. I'd like that. Good. She has more questions for you. She always has more questions. That's how you know she's paying attention. Marcus stepped into the elevator. Before the doors closed, he turned back. You're not the same person you were 3 weeks ago. I don't know who you're becoming yet, but for the first time, I believe it might be someone worth knowing. The doors closed. Victoria stood alone in the empty hallway, Marcus's words echoing in her mind. Someone worth knowing. 3 weeks ago, she would have assumed she already was. Now, she understood that worth isn't something you're born with or achieve or buy. It's something you earn. Every day, every choice, every moment you decide to be better than you were before. Victoria reached into her pocket and touched Emma's letter. Second chances aren't about deserving. They're about becoming. She was still becoming. But for the first time, she believed she might actually get there. 6 months had passed since the night Victoria Sterling tore up a $5 million check and changed the course of her life. She stood now in the lobby of Sterling Memorial Hospital, watching workers install the final letters of a sign she never thought she'd see. The Emma and Catherine Thompson Pediatric Center. Gold letters on white marble. A testament to 2 lives, one lost and one fighting, that had somehow redeemed her own. Marcus Thompson stood beside her, his hands in the pockets of the same simple suit he'd worn to the gala. The same scuffed shoes. The same quiet dignity that had survived her worst assumptions and emerged stronger. It's beautiful, Victoria said quietly. It's necessary, Marcus replied. Every child who walks through those doors will know that someone believed they were worth saving, that their life mattered enough to build something permanent. How's Emma today? She's in remission. Victoria turned to look at him, not trusting herself to speak. The doctors confirmed it this morning. 6 months of treatment and the cancer is gone. Not managed, not controlled, gone. Marcus's voice cracked slightly. She's going home next week. Victoria felt tears building behind her eyes. That's wonderful news. It's a miracle. One that wouldn't have happened without this hospital, without this research, without the funding that made it all possible. He paused. Funding that you tried to destroy. The words stung, but Victoria accepted them. She'd earned that reminder. She would carry it forever. I know. Do you really understand how close I came to losing her because of a woman who decided I didn't deserve respect? I understand. The night you tore up that check, Emma was scheduled for her first round of experimental treatment. The treatment that saved her life. If the research had been delayed, if the funding had been disrupted, if any single piece of the puzzle had been missing. He trailed off. Victoria closed her eyes. "I'm sorry. I know that doesn't change anything, but I'm sorry." "You're right. It doesn't change anything." Marcus turned to face her fully. "But what you've done since then does." She opened her eyes. 6 months ago, you were a woman who saw a black man in cheap clothes and decided he was worthless. Today, you're a woman who spends 3 days a week at a community center teaching financial literacy to families who look nothing like you. You've implemented reforms that have changed how hundreds of employees treat thousands of customers. You've faced down investors who wanted to kill everything we've built. You've become someone different. I'm still becoming. We all are. That's the point. Marcus gestured toward the sign being installed above them. Catherine never stopped becoming. Even at the end, even when she knew she was dying, she was still learning, still growing, still trying to be better than she was the day before. She sounds remarkable. She was. She would have liked you. The person you are now, I mean. Not the person you were. Victoria almost smiled. I wouldn't have liked that person either. Then why were you her for so long? The question caught Victoria off guard. She'd spent 6 months examining her actions, her assumptions, her prejudices, but she'd never really asked herself why she'd become someone she now despised. I think I was afraid. Of what? Of being seen as weak, of being dismissed the way I dismissed others, of losing the power I'd spent my whole life building. Victoria shook her head slowly. I thought if I was hard enough, cold enough, judgmental enough, no one could ever hurt me. No one could ever look down on me the way I looked down on them. And now I understand that the walls I built to protect myself were actually a prison. I was so busy defending myself from imaginary threats that I couldn't see the real damage I was doing, to others, to myself. Marcus nodded slowly. Catherine said something similar once. She said that fear makes us small. It makes us cruel. The only way to grow is to let go of the fear and trust that we'll survive whatever comes. Did she survive? No, but she died without regret. She died knowing she'd lived fully loved completely and left the world better than she found it. He paused. Can you say the same? Victoria thought about the question seriously. Not yet, but I'm working toward it. That's all any of us can do. The workers finished installing the sign. Emma and Catherine Thompson Pediatric Center. The letters gleamed in the morning light, a permanent reminder of what love and loss and redemption could build. There's a dedication ceremony next week, Marcus said. Emma wants to speak. She's been writing her speech for a month. I'd like to be there, if that's appropriate. It's appropriate. You're part of this story now, whether you wanted to be or not. I never wanted to be, but I'm grateful that I am. Marcus pulled a small envelope from his pocket. Emma asked me to give you this. She said you'd understand. Victoria took the envelope. Inside was a single photograph. Emma standing in her hospital room, thin but smiling, holding a handwritten sign that read, Second chances aren't about deserving. They're about becoming. Thank you for not wasting yours. Victoria's hands trembled. I don't deserve this. No, you don't. But that's what makes it meaningful. Marcus started walking toward the hospital entrance. Come on, Emma's been asking about you all morning. She wants to show you something. They rode the elevator to the 4th floor in silence. Victoria clutched Emma's photograph like a talisman proof that transformation was possible, even when it seemed impossible. Room 412 looked different now. The medical equipment had been removed. The IV stands were gone. In their place were flowers and cards and balloons celebrating 6 months of survival. Emma sat cross-legged on her bed, her hair growing back in soft curls. Her color returned, her eyes bright with life instead of fear. You came. Your father said you wanted to see me. I wanted to show you something. Emma held up a thick folder. I've been collecting these for months. Every letter, every email, every message from people who watched what happened at the gala and were inspired to change something in their own lives. Victoria sat down in the chair beside the bed. How many are there? Thousands, from all over the world. People who saw the video and realized they'd been making the same assumptions you made. People who looked at their own prejudices and decided to do something about them. Emma opened the folder and pulled out a letter at random. This one's from a teacher in Ohio. She says she watched the video and realized she'd been treating her black students differently than her white students. Not consciously, but consistently. She's completely changed how she approaches her classroom. She pulled out another letter. This one's from a bank manager in Texas. He says he saw what happened to my dad and felt sick because he'd done similar things. Not as extreme, but similar. He implemented new training programs at his branch, and 3 employees have already thanked him for helping them see their own biases. Letter after letter, story after story. A ripple effect spreading across the country and beyond. You see, Emma looked at Victoria with an intensity that belied her 14 years. What happened that night was terrible. What you did was wrong. But look what came out of it. Look how many people changed because they saw you fail and then watched you try to become better. I didn't do this. You did. Your father did. We all did. That's the point. Emma set the folder aside. My mom used to say that every action creates ripples. Good actions create good ripples. Bad actions create bad ripples. But sometimes, if you're brave enough, you can transform bad ripples into good ones. Your mother was very wise. She was. And she would have told you something else too. What's that? She would have told you that forgiveness isn't about the person who hurt you. It's about the person doing the forgiving. It's about choosing to release the weight so you can move forward. Emma took a deep breath. I forgive you, Ms. Sterling, for what you did to my dad, for the humiliation, for the assumptions, for everything. Victoria felt the words wash over her like a wave breaking something loose inside her chest that she hadn't even known was frozen. I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know, but I'm giving it anyway, because carrying that anger was making me heavy, and I want to be light. Emma smiled, and for a moment she looked exactly like the photographs of her mother. Besides, you've earned it, not with words, with actions, 6 months of actions. Victoria couldn't speak. Tears streamed down her face, unchecked. Marcus stood in the doorway watching his daughter offer grace to the woman who had tried to destroy him. His eyes glistened. Catherine would be proud of you, he said softly. I know, Dad. She's why I can do this. Emma turned back to Victoria. There's one more thing I want to show you. She pulled out her laptop and opened a video file. I've been working on this with my dad. It's a documentary about what happened. The gala, the aftermath, the reforms, everything. We're releasing it next week on the same day as the dedication ceremony. Victoria watched the opening frames. Her own face twisted with contempt, tearing up Marcus's check. The scattered pieces falling at his feet. The crowd laughing. The live stream comments scrolling. I don't know if I can watch this. You need to, because it doesn't end there. The video continued. The revelation. The board meeting. Victoria's tearful apology at the press conference. Then footage Victoria had never seen. Community center workers talking about her transformation. Customers sharing stories of being treated with dignity at Sterling Pharmaceuticals branches. Employees describing how the new training had changed the way they saw the world. And finally, Victoria herself, elbow deep in dishwater at the community center, laughing with Mrs. Patterson reading to children mopping floors without complaint. That's who you're becoming, Emma said. That's what transformation looks like. Not perfect, not finished, but real. The video ended with Emma's face thin and tired but radiant with hope. My name is Emma Thompson. 6 months ago, a woman humiliated my father in front of the world. She tore up his check. She called him a fraud. She tried to have him arrested. And then something extraordinary happened. She changed. Not because she had to, not because she was forced, because she chose to become someone different. If she can do it, so can you. So can all of us. Change isn't about being perfect. It's about being willing to try. The screen went black. Victoria sat in stunned silence. "We've already had interest from 3 major networks," Marcus said. "They want to broadcast it nationally, potentially internationally." "Why are you showing me this?" "Because I want your permission," Emma said. "The documentary includes footage of your worst moment. The moment you're probably most ashamed of. I won't release it without your consent." "You don't need my consent. That footage is public. You can use it however you want." "I know. But I want your consent anyway. Because that's what respect looks like." Emma's eyes met hers. "That's what you've been learning all these months. That everyone deserves to be asked. Everyone deserves to have their dignity considered." Victoria looked at the frozen frame on the laptop. Her own face twisted with ugly assumptions captured forever in digital clarity. "Release it." "Are you sure?" "Yes. Because that person existed. I can't pretend she didn't. And if showing her worst moment can help even one person recognize themselves and choose differently, then the humiliation is worth it." Emma smiled. "My mom would have liked you." "Your father said the same thing." "Then it must be true." The dedication ceremony took place on a bright Saturday morning 1 week later. Hundreds of people gathered in the hospital lobby beneath the gold letters spelling out Emma and Catherine Thompson Pediatric Center. Marcus stood at the podium looking out over a crowd that included hospital staff, community members, business leaders, and dozens of children who had been treated in the very wing being dedicated. 5 years ago, my wife Catherine was diagnosed with Hartman's disease. She fought it for 3 years before it finally took her from us. But in those 3 years, she taught me something that I've tried to live by every day since. He paused, gathering himself. She taught me that our worth isn't determined by our circumstances, not by our jobs or our clothes or the color of our skin. Our worth is determined by how we treat others, by the compassion we show, by the bridges we build instead of the walls we construct. His eyes found Victoria in the crowd. She also taught me that everyone deserves a second chance, not because they've earned it, not because they deserve it, but because redemption is the most powerful force in the human experience. When we give someone the opportunity to become better, we're not just changing them. We're changing ourselves. We're declaring that we believe in the possibility of transformation. He gestured toward the sign above him. "This center is named for 2 people I love. My wife, who believed in second chances even when she was dying, and my daughter, who has shown more grace at 14 than most people show in a lifetime. They are the reason I'm standing here today. They are the reason any of this exists." Marcus stepped back from the podium. "Now I'd like to introduce someone who has learned the hard way what second chances really mean. 6 months ago, she tore up a check meant for this hospital. Today, she's helped build something that will save lives for generations. Ladies and gentlemen, Victoria Sterling." The applause was scattered, uncertain. Many people in the crowd had seen the video. They knew what Victoria had done. They weren't sure she deserved to speak. Victoria walked to the podium on legs that trembled slightly. She looked out over the crowd, faces she recognized, and faces she didn't, all waiting to see what she would say. 6 months ago, I stood in a ballroom surrounded by wealth and power, and I made a choice. I looked at a man in a simple suit with scuffed shoes, and I decided he was worthless. I decided that his appearance told me everything I needed to know about his character. I decided that I was better than him because of how I looked and how much money I had and what position I held. She paused. I was wrong. Not just factually wrong, morally wrong, spiritually wrong. Wrong in every way a person can be wrong.